Good evening, everyone around Australia. Welcome to our webinar for this evening. We're going to be meeting the innovators tonight. I'd like to firstly say I hope everyone is safe and well at home. The College of Law has shut all our campuses, but we are very much still here for you in the virtual world. So if anyone is needing any further information or support from the College of Law, please contact us via the usual methods that you would do to contact us normally. I would first of all like to introduce Terri Mottershead. She is the Executive Director of the Centre for Legal Innovation at the College of Law. And I'd also like to welcome and thank all our panellists as well. I'm going to slip off now and sit here in the background and let Terri introduce you to your amazing panelists and start the conversation. There is a chat box where you will be able to ask questions, and I invite you to do so because let's face it, we're all here at home, we're starved for human interaction, so we really welcome you to engage with these amazing panelists that have joined us. So thank you, everyone. I will turn myself off and leave you to it.
Thank you, Jackie. It's wonderful to be here and to be able to spend the time with you on really some amazing topics and important topics at any time, but certainly important right now. As Jackie mentioned, really we have an amazing group of people to spend the time with us today. I'm going to ask a bunch of questions of them, and hopefully that'll prompt some questions that you might like to ask as well. And we will be sure to leave plenty of time for that to be able to happen. I'm just going to really quickly mention who the folks are here that you can see, and then we'll kind of kick off, as I said, the webinar with some questions from me. So firstly, Jemima Harris, who's the Director at LOD Innovation and Design, who we've decided wins the prize for the most interesting background for this webinar. Angus Murray, who's a partner with Irish Bentley and also the co-founder of the Legal Forecast, unashamedly doing some amazing advertising for the Legal Forecast there. Exactly. Well done, Angus. Jessica Popple, who is a solicitor with Cameron Rogers and Co. Solicitors. Jessica, welcome. And also Jessica is our inaugural Young Legalpreneurs Scholar for the Centre for Legal Innovation as well. So delighted on many fronts to have you here today, Jessica. And last but certainly not least is Royle, who is the Head of Legal Technology Solutions at Ashurst, Australia. Welcome, Tay, as well. So as I said, a fantastic panel, and we're going to launch straight in to this webinar with a question that we're going to direct firstly at you, Jemima. So you ready for this one? Yeah?
I'm ready.
We wanted to get all of the folks here to tell you a little bit about their story, about their role, how they came to it, to give you the background to that, and also to perhaps think about the sort of questions, again, that you might want to put to them based upon that. So as I said, Jemima, let's kick off with you. What's your story?
My story. So I came to my current role by a fairly circuitous route, I think would be fair to say. I'm pretty sure the job I do now didn't exist when I started uni 20-something years ago. So it couldn't have been a deliberate long-term plan. Or a case of right or wrong place at the right or wrong time along the way. So my first proper legal job was as a law clerk in-house at the CSIRO. And I had no idea until I saw the role advertised on the uni jobs board that there were such things as in-house lawyers. And so I thought, this sounds pretty good. And I applied and I got the job. And I think that was probably what sparked for me an interest in innovation and different ways of thinking, because I got to work with a bunch of really interesting people, most of whom weren't lawyers, and did a lot of really interesting stuff there, but thought I should go and see what it's like on the other side of the fence, and worked for a while in a small private practice law firm doing a mix of general commercial litigation and insurance work, but the lure of working in-house was a bit too strong, and after about 5 years of that I went and worked in-house in a technology company, again doing general commercial work and working with a lot of engineers and other interesting, clever people. And unfortunately that business collapsed and I ended up losing my job, so I decided to give contract lawyering a go, which was something I hadn't really seriously considered before, but it ended up leading me to a number of great roles, including one at Lex Foco, where I started initially as a secondee lawyer working for various clients, including the in-house legal team at Brisbane Airport. And then that evolved, as that business evolved, into managing the business here in Queensland, and developed an interest in legal operations and legal technology, drawing on my experience in in-house legal teams. And the Lexvoco business was acquired by LOD about a year ago. And since that time, I've been able to focus on what has, I guess, become my passion, legal operations and technology consulting work, and still with a bit of actual lawyering thrown in to keep my hand in. But I really enjoy the diverse range of work I get to do, and getting out and talking to people and helping in-house lawyers and government lawyers do their job more effectively and more efficiently, and hopefully be happier lawyers. So that's how I got to where I am now, in the pantry.
But a great story of how, you know, you might start in one place, stay in the same industry, but where there's a whole bunch of options for you to kind of go within that industry, which leads me to you, Tay, and your story. You're on mute. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for that, Terry. Again, I had a somewhat roundabout route myself. My desire to get into legal technology really stemmed from a deep-seated frustration with how we carried on work as lawyers on a day-to-day basis. I was working with Ashurst, then called Blake Dawson, in 2010. I was working as part of the corporate team, and in a lot of ways, I felt that we spent each day reinventing the wheel, and we weren't necessarily learning a lot from what we'd done the previous day. And it seemed to me there was a lot of repetitive work being done, that there had to be a better way. And so just between these four walls and the 100 people or so on the call, I went out and didn't tell anyone about it, didn't mention it to anyone, went out and started a black IT project. And I went and spoke with a bunch of vendors and found out about document automation, asked them to come into the firm, had a chat to them about what their products were and what they did, learned about this new thing called the cloud, and managed to persuade one of them to give me access to their software so I could learn how to use it. Following on from that, I went and spoke to the IT team and said, well, actually, I've been talking with these vendors about this product. I think it's really cool. Do you think you can give me a bit of seed funding in order to do a project? And to their credit, they were quite good. They gave me a small amount of money so I could get proper software licenses. I then progressed and automated a few of the firm's documents, went to the board and said, hey, you guys, this is an area we need to get into. This is going to be important in the future. Look what we can do. And I gave them a little demo. And again, to their credit, they recognized the capabilities, and they said, okay, well, we'll give you a bit more money and we'll allow you to spin up a project. Shortly after this, there was a merger between Blake Dawson and Ashurst, and I got introduced to a chap called Mike Polson, who was in the process of setting up a nearshoring center in Glasgow. And he was quite interested in technology. And he persuaded me to come work for him, still being based in Brisbane, but reporting into the Glasgow office. And from there, I picked up an employee in Glasgow and slowly started building a legal technology team, which is now global. And we've got about 10 people with us, and we're on a really exciting journey. We span all sorts of technologies across the firm, and we've also got a mandate to go out and discover new and exciting things and bring them back to the firm. So I'm really excited to be in the role that I am. It's taken a while, but and taken a few risks along the way. But it's been a great journey.
And Tay, it won't kind of be a surprise for folks to hear your accent and to know that your journey has also taken you around the world, really, as well. So important, I think, to note that as we sit here in Australia, not only, as Tay's explained, our jobs potentially global, but they also take us to different places around the world as well. So Angus, let me, if I may, turn to you and get you to tell us your story.
My story probably starts in the place that some people have experienced and some people would probably frown on, and that's as a 12-year-old wanting to do law but not really understanding what law is, but having a passion for the concept of the fabric and the interaction between people, which really is, in its essence, what law is. At 12, I didn't have that insight, I must admit, but it's an insight that's grown over the last couple of years. I would describe my journey probably in three connected strands, being a story in academia, a story in policy advocacy, and a story in the professional practice of law. So I started off as the first cohort through the University of Southern Queensland's law program in Toowoomba, run, or at least I took it partially on campus and partially externally, and studied externally as I was working as a paralegal in a law firm in Toowoomba, which was a wonderful experience being able to see how law is practiced at the same time as law is studied. And I think the practical application of law is vitally important when you're going through the studying side, regardless of the subject matter you're practicing or involved with. My USQ journey involved the foundation of the USQ Law Society and a whole heap of interesting things that come from effectively being a guinea pig in a law program. And I can come back to that in a moment. I finished my law program at USQ with a capstone project on the topic, which was effectively a prediction of the High Court's reasoning in the iiNet and Roadshow Entertainment decision, which is a decision about the role of an intermediary or an internet service provider, as the case was, in the context of copyright enforcement for online infringements. That opened up for me a can of worms that I'm still chewing through, which was the concept of privacy and the concept of enforcing law in a digital environment. I was sufficiently grasped and captured in that context and with that concept that I took the study further and travelled to Sweden, where I completed a Master of European Intellectual Property Law at Stockholm University, which would have to be, in my view, one of the most incredible universities and places in the world. It exposed me to a cohort of colleagues, and in fact I posted on LinkedIn yesterday a picture of a possum that was in the backyard. And he's working remotely as you get possums to play with. And I was recalling that approximately 7 years ago, I was sitting in a room with 30 of my European colleagues explaining what a possum was in the context of ABC and league game nets, which was at the time Australia's leading decision on breach of confidence in the context of privacy law, which was a substantial part of my thesis. It was a really remarkable experience because it opened my eyes beyond the common law jurisdiction we practice in Australia and to a variety of different perspectives from people all over the world in the course of my Masters by research. I then came back to Australia and found it very difficult to get a job. I was an interesting graduate. I had finished a law degree at a law school that had only very recently been established. And then I'd done this somewhat curious and strange thing of travelling across the planet to complete a Masters by research in a civil law jurisdiction on a comparative study between Australia and the European Union on the right to enforce copyright and the personal right to privacy, which, as I'm sure some people in the audience would appreciate, is a fairly, or at least was at the time, a fairly niche and seemingly limited application to put one's mind to in an academic context. I was fortunate to join Telstra's team in effectively data integrity and compliance management, which was a workflow and data integrity as well as document automation to a degree role within Telstra, which was something that I probably didn't appreciate at the time, but with hindsight I can see that some of the skills that I learned there in terms of workflow management and process production and compliance is extremely important now to legal practice. And as I wasn't able to easily grab a hold into legal practice or open a door into legal practice, and wanting to keep a hold of what I had found true passion in Sweden in the context of digital rights and the personal right to privacy, I joined an organisation called Electronic Frontiers Australia, and was fortunate very rapidly to be seconded onto the board and to become the vice chair of that organisation. I've remained with that organisation since I joined in 2013, and I currently chair the policy committee of Electronic Frontiers Australia, which is tasked with digital rights, advocacy and promotion of digital rights for Australians. That organisation has taken me to Canberra several times. In fact, 2 weeks ago, I was supposed to be in Canberra giving evidence to the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security on assistance and access legislation, but for the reason we're conducting this via Zoom, that fell away. I was fortunate through EFA to meet people that were based in Queensland and encouraged me to join the Queensland Council for Civil Liberties. And I joined that very shortly after Electronic Frontiers Australia. I currently sit as a Vice President of the QCCL, and in fact, as we speak, the QCCL is meeting for a board discussion to discuss a number of things, including civil liberties associated with the COVID legislative reform. Equally, I've appeared in Parliament and done quite a bit of public speaking in the context of civil liberties with QCCL. Shortly after joining QCCL, I was offered a position with the firm Irish Bentley, which I remain at. I took the leap from what I've described as a quasi-legal role within Telstra to private practice in a small firm in Brisbane, and I've stayed with Irish Bentley since. I'm now a partner of that firm and a registered trademarks attorney, and I've had all sorts of wonderful experiences in the course of that progression through the career, and the challenges and excitements that exist as a partner of the firm. In the course of reflecting that journey, I suppose in the early stages of me going into practice with Irish Bentley, I, together with a number of what I now consider to be very close friends, met a couple of times and talked about the tension and difficulties that exist between studying law and then coming into practice. The seemingly large gap that exists between studying law and then coming into practice, and the lack of nexus or bridge between those two important aspects of a legal career. And so formed the Legal Forecast, which, as Terri pointed out, I am shamelessly representing and promoting. The Legal Forecast being a not-for-profit organisation that serves to facilitate a connection between the study of law and the practice of law. And that has an overarching focus in the application of technology within both legal education and legal practice, and underpinned by a value for mental wellness for lawyers. There's a number of exciting projects that I'm sure we can circulate information around the Legal Forecast is doing now and this year and in the past. And then my story almost goes full circle, which is the final of those branches that I've mentioned. I now am involved quite heavily with the University of Southern Queensland guest lecturing and having written and delivered a course with USQ called Emerging Legal Technology and Practice, which touches on a number of the issues that I'm sure we're going to get through with my wonderful panelists today in terms of new modes of practice and the technologies that exist for practitioners now, and some of the risks that attach to the benefits of technology. That's probably me in a nutshell.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And Jessica, tell us your story.
So mine is a little bit similar to Angus in that I was the first group to go through the University of the Sunshine Coast Law Program. I had a similar role to what he had in setting up our Law Students Association, and that also led me to eventually, in my final year of study and during TLT, being the Vice President of Administration for the Australian Law Students Association. So I had a pretty big role in those sorts of different committees. Mine was a little bit different though, in that I worked at a supermarket for the 6 years that I was studying at uni. And my first law job was actually the year that I finished uni, and was the job that I was in up until last Tuesday. So I was working in a small firm in the Noosa hinterland, and I was admitted in August of 2018 after finishing my PLT. So I'm still a baby lawyer who's not quite yet unrestricted. Because of everything that's sort of happening in the world at the moment, unfortunately, I was unemployed for a day last week. It's the fact of what's happening in the world at the moment, in that, not everyone is able to keep their jobs, unfortunately. But I was very lucky to be able to, as Terri mentioned, pick up some work with Cameron Rogers and Co in Budrum. And I am currently sitting on a million committees because I have a problem in saying no, but I'm sitting on the Queensland Law Society Early Career Lawyers Committee as the Sunshine Coast representative. I'm the Social Secretary for the Women Lawyers Association of Queensland, the Social Secretary for the Sunshine Coast Law Association, and also one of the co-founders of the Sunshine Coast Young Lawyers. And as Terri mentioned, I was the inaugural Centre for Legal Innovation Young Legalpreneur Scholar for Queensland. So and I think we're going to talk about it in a little while as well, but I was invited to the summit in Melbourne last year with a lot of other grads and young lawyers from around the country, and sort of given the opportunity to talk and learn about all things to do with legal tech. And I guess in my role, working in small firms has been probably quite a lot different to the other panelists, in that it's a lot of very practical things that legal technology is used for. So a lot of electronic conveyancing and electronic filing and things like that from a very sort of base level point of view, but the way that technology is involved in those sorts of tasks.
Fantastic. Thank you all very much. I mean, I've taken away kind of a number of quick points from that, if I may summarise them, and that is to be adaptable, consider options that you might want to pursue your passion. I think that came through very strongly as well. To know that your skills are global, be willing to take some risks, and also I think a big one about this now is really that focus on resilience being really important too. We've got a question from our audience, and as it turns out, it was a question that we were going to pose to all of you anyway, so let me do that now. The question that's been posed is, as you look at kind of traditional skills that might be associated with practicing law versus tech skills, what sort of tech skills do folks really need to be focusing on? Where is that showing up in terms of, I'm going to say particularly because most of our participants fall into this this kind of category, for law students that may be leaving law school shortly, or for early career professionals. And Tay, we can hear from your story that you've got to be the right person for me to initially address that to. So where are you seeing that kind of showing up at the moment, say in your firm or in others?
Thanks, Terri. It's interesting, and things have been brought into fairly stark relief with the changes to business over the last 3 weeks. We're seeing a significant surge in demand for legal technology and associated services, with particular emphasis on DocuSign. Now, DocuSign is interesting because it's a relatively simple legal technology, but the legal issues associated with it are actually reasonably complex, particularly when you're dealing with multiple jurisdictions. Whether that's you're getting documents signed in Australia, Hong Kong, Singapore, or the United Kingdom, there's very different rules and requirements that apply. So picking up the first section of the question about whether traditional legal skills are somehow redundant, to the contrary, they are just as important as ever. And sometimes even in a very focused legal technology area, like the use of e-signature, often the legal issues are still more important and more pressing than the actual technology side, because a lot of this technology is pretty easy and pretty basic to use once you learn how to use it. So I don't want to in any way detract from the importance of people's law degrees and their formal legal training. It's incredibly important. But what we've got now is we've got the option to actually put an additional layer on top of that, such that you're able to take your legal skills and make them more widely available. So in the context of the current business situation, right now I'm building an app for businesses to determine whether or not they qualify for government guaranteed business continuity loans. This is something I was literally doing about half an hour before we came on this call, and that's using a no-code platform. And it's these sorts of skills that then allow you to take your legal knowledge and disseminate it to tens or hundreds or potentially thousands of people that need your help, and support your clients, which may be a bank or financial institution, in engaging with these individuals or small businesses. So the combination of the legal and the technical skills are incredibly powerful.
I want to come to you in just a sec, Angus, because I want to talk a little bit about your hackathons and how people, particularly the group that we're looking at the moment, can kind of get involved with understanding some of the gaps in legal tech, and then also working in a pressure cooker environment to come up with solutions which may then feed into a different understanding and making them attractive to someone like Tay, who's putting apps together. So I'm posing that question for you to have a think about for a second. But Jessica, I just wanted to address that question that I addressed to Tay to you particularly as well, because you're someone that's been in the profession now for a couple of years. What tech skills did you feel entering the profession that, say, you didn't have, that you had to ramp up really quickly? And as law students sitting in one of Angus's classes at the moment, what do you want to be focusing on in order to try and make yourself as ready for that practice that you can be? So what words of wisdom can you pass on to folks in that area?
I think, like you said before, being really adaptable is something that's really important. So if you don't understand something, or it's something that you haven't done before, it's investing that time to try and understand it. So when I first started at my first firm, they had just signed up to the electronic conveyancing platform, which was Texas. So I spent a lot of time just sort of going through it and looking at the back end to try and work out how it all works. So how, the property transfers from A to B, and how the money goes from A to B. And being inquisitive about, how things work and why they're being done a different way to what they're traditionally done. And also sort of cluing yourself up on the benefits of doing things a different way, so that then you can explain to, your senior partners or your principals why you should be trying to make those changes within your firm's, traditional ways of doing things. I know, for example, a lot of other sort of more regional firms might have principals and senior partners who are sort of stuck in their ways of doing things the traditional way, and that's it. But being able to explain, the benefits and why it's going to be better for the business and better for the client is definitely something that's a really big plus.
Fantastic. So Angus, how are folks going to find out about those technologies? Where do they go at this early stage of their career to get skilled in the sorts of things that both Tay and Jessica have been chatting about?
I'd start the answer to that just reinforcing something that Jessica just said, which is extremely important, and that's being inquisitive. I think that's probably the heart of the answer in the broadest sense, and just generally as a trait, a personality trait for anyone involved in law, whether that's directly or indirectly. So in the practice of law itself in its truest traditional sense, or in the ancillary services in the law tech or legal service operations, inquisitive nature is really useful. If I could really boil down what being a lawyer is in my eyes, because I think that answers Caitlin's question, which I think is a very good question. I would say that law at its absolute core is attention to detail applied logically, or logic applied with attention to detail is probably a better way of framing that. And it's the skills of critical reasoning and critical analysis that you develop in university that really get refined the more you practice. So again, that logic with attention to detail and being inquisitive in the process of doing that, I think, is the easiest answer. And that answers, where do you find legal technology? If I can jump on the back of something what Tay said, comprehensively agreeing with him, taking my own perspective on this, I come with a bias, which is, as I said, doing a lot of workflow management process work that has helped me a lot. I have a limited technology background, and I advocate in digital rights and a lot of e-commerce platforms through my intellectual property practice. But really, I think the most important thing for law students is to get down the understanding of how law is practiced. So the traditional legal skills that Callum was mentioning, I think that's the attention to detail, I think that's the logic, and I think that's the critical reasoning and critical analysis. If you understand the process that something is going through, I think the technology is there in its simplest form, as Tay mentioned, to be picked up on. It's often the case, in my view, that people try and over-engineer the simplest tool. Understanding the process is really the starting point. That comes with experience. It comes with being inquisitive. As a plug for the Legal Forecast has just launched a project called TLF Connect, which is intended to connect law students and up to 2-year post-admission experience lawyers to mentors in 3 streams: legal technology, legal innovation, and traditional practice of law. Finding mentors and finding people that you can talk to and soundboard off, whether that's your managing partner, whether that's a senior associate, whether that's a colleague, or whether that's someone completely outside of law, I think that's the best way to go, and do that with an inquisitive nature, because anything that I said now, that the source of knowledge or the fountain of knowledge is located here, I guarantee you tomorrow it will be in a different place. It's the inquisitive nature that's required to chase that. Reinforce what Jessica said completely.
And Jemima, I wanted to ask you, we've heard that expression legal operations a few times now, and I know this is something that's near and dear to your heart, and also with that background that you just spoke to in terms of working in a tech company. How much is that need to be able to use tech tools, or at least learn them quite quickly in the delivery of legal services now, around that legal operations efficiency and effectiveness vibe, if you like, important? And to the extent that the folks that are on this call should be focusing on that.
I think it's really important, but to kind of continue from what Angus was just saying, I think the fundamental legal skills and really understanding the process of practicing law and ensuring that you understand the underlying process is really fundamental, because if you're going to add technology into it, if you don't have a good grounding in the basics, then you'll amplify problems. But I think some good complementary skills around that in things like change management, any form of innovation, whether it involves technology or not, involves change. And historically, I would say lawyers are probably not the best at that. And to take from what Jessica mentioned about having to go to the business and explain why using tools might be a good way to do things differently. Having some change management skills in your back pocket is a really good way to take people on the journey and to find better and more efficient ways of doing things while still kind of sticking to the basics.
Absolutely. Now, one of the questions that was posed was, where does one go for resources if they want to learn more about technology, if they want to learn more about the things that you were mentioning? So I'm going to rattle off a few, and I'm going to ask you folks to jump in and fill the gaps if I haven't covered them. Obviously, there is an organisation called the Legal Hackers, which have meetups from time to time in Brisbane, but in other jurisdictions as well. So that's kind of one. If I may, Angus, the Legal Forecast holds a number of events and also holds hackathons, which are students and early career professionals, great opportunities for you to get into the mix in terms of technology, and particularly with an access to justice focus. I think it would be fair to say, from the hackathons anyway, Angus, but more broadly, I'm sure that the early career professionals associations and committees that you're associated with, Jessica, are also focusing on that. I would say to you that the Centre for Legal Innovation has a wealth of videos that are all available to you free on the website right now for you to go to, and we hold virtual demos of technology every month that, again, you can either see live or you can watch later. So all of those are available to you free of charge now. And I think if you start exploring through some of those avenues, and certainly the information that's coming out of law firms that have a significant tech focus, of which Ashurst is obviously one, other organisations like LOD, Lawyers on Demand, obviously another, it'll lead you to other paths that you can walk down. Part of the question was also, how do you get access to them? There is a plethora of information available on the web, and a great deal of it is free. And there are a number of MOOCs that you can also take in these sort of courses that are available, again, for free. So, I would just kind of mention that to you as well. We've also had a question about if you're an international law student from Canada and you'd like to get admitted in Australia, what can you do? I'm going to say talk to the College of Law, and they'll help you with that inquiry. So that info is there available for you as well. So we'll get to that one. The question that we've also been asked, and Angus, I might address it initially to you, but it's a question about to what extent do legal incubators exist? And I'm going to address this question to you in relation to universities. And Tay, I'm going to come to you in relation to law firms that are running legal incubators or legal tech incubators, if you like, as well. So Angus, first, if I may, to you, do you run, in the course that you're doing, is there an incubator component to that? Or is the law school associated with an incubator component to that?
Answering the question directly and then more broadly, the course I run at USQ is more about a grounding in the understanding of what legal practice is, so the modes of legal practice, whether it's an incorporated legal practice, a traditional partnership, or a multiple disciplinary practice, and the advantages and disadvantages for each of those, an overview of what technology exists in the market, and then an ethical approach to the risks and benefits of the application of technology before how technology is actually applied within legal practice. So it isn't an incubator, it's more a grounding in this is the way in which you understand technology in law.
Yeah.
One key point that I have with that, which will sum up, I think, what my panelists have just very eloquently articulated each respectively, technology is not a shortcut. Technology is actually the longest possible path you can take, because you are, in my view, required to understand all of the ins and outs in the way that Jessica was explaining, in the way that Jemima was reinforcing in terms of the workflow and the process from the basics. You need to understand everything that's happening before you should apply technology. So it's actually a lot longer process than simply just turning on the machine, letting the machine work. In terms of incubators and roles that exist in Queensland, at least, the Legal Forecast has run its flagship hackathon, Disrupting Law, 5 times, with last year running nationally. Several of the solutions that have come out of that 54-hour hackathon between students, firms and IT, students and professionals, have ended up being commercialised and have had some Series A funding. I've also been involved with the University of Queensland's King and Wood Malleson's Innovation Prize, which was a $10,000 prize to a team that pitched the most compelling legal innovation solution. There are any number of firms, most of them big law firms, that have their own incubators that run. I believe Mills Oakley is one, Allen's is another, that run effectively in-house or funded legal technology projects. It's a question, I think, more of what is the technology or what is it that you're attempting to get incubated, and fully developing an idea and pitching it in the same way that you pitch any startup. I certainly think that there's a market for it. I think the appetite is quite great. In terms of how you enter into that, I think the most important thing is, again, that being inquisitive and looking for where there's gaps in the market. So like Tay said at the start, there's a lot of what exists in law, and this is the task in disrupting law, that is repetitive and that really doesn't require constant human involvement. So for example, if it's a lease that has a whole heap of pre-fillable fields and each of the field has only 5 variables, that type of thing is ripe for automation. There's a lot of that really low-hanging fruit with relatively easy-to-use technology that's sitting around. And there are a lot of firms that have an appetite for people in that legal innovation or legal service operation and legal service design at the moment that I think is growing. I would suspect that Jemima or Tay are probably more qualified to discuss the legal service design operations.
Thanks very much. Tay, there's another question there I'll come back to in just a sec, but I wanted you, Angus mentioned or touched on the incubators that some law firms are obviously leading, and he spoke about Mills Oakley and also Allen's, and there's Lander and Rogers, and of course there's Ashurst. So tell us a little bit about how your incubator works, and I guess in a way, why would law firms be entering into that space is probably another part of that.
Thanks, Terri. Yeah, that's a really interesting area because we've spent a lot of time thinking quite deeply about this. So we've got a investment arm and development arm known as Ashurst Digital Ventures. And the role of that arm actually started out as an incubator to bring in a wide variety of participants and support them in developing new products. along the journey, we found that we had such a strong flow of ideas from within the firm internally, and such a strong demand for developing those ideas into products, that we actually pivoted and became an internally facing incubator. And there's a number of major products we're working on at the moment with a view to bringing them to market. There's a strong theme that flows through this, which is we're passing through some fairly turbulent times. There's a lot of legislative change. And one of the issues that we're really interested in is helping our clients manage legislative change. So a lot of the products that we're building at the moment are focused on those specific issues, and it is a full spectrum. I want to come back to the question about where the gaps are in existing legal tech. Legal tech right now is essentially a series of point solutions. You've got tools that are good at automating documents. You've got machine learning tools, which are good at pulling some information out of documents. You've got e-signing tools. You've got collaboration tools, which are okay for sharing documents, but there's just huge gaps in between. And there's no one in the market that is really taking an overall view. There's no one in the market that's doing a really good job of linking these tools together. The process piece, as mentioned by Angus, is so incredibly important. And from my personal experience, I don't think anyone is doing that particularly well in terms of the workflow as it flows through the firm, as it passes through multiple hands, as it's handed off, as it's signed off, as it's escalated, as it's shared with the client. I think there's huge opportunities in enabling lawyers to better manage their work, and that's an area of keen interest in R&D from our perspective.
And let me expand on that, which is kind of another question that we've got up there in terms of asking your thoughts on this. If you're in practice already, you can see those gaps obviously much easier because you've been working and you can see what has to be more efficient or more effective or whatever the case may be.
Because we suffer from them, Terri.
Because we suffer from them. I know. I'm with you. I hear you, buddy. I hear you. Okay. But what if you haven't been in practice a really long time? So, I'm going to ask you this question too, Jessica, right? What if you haven't been in practice a really long time, but you're a budding entrepreneur in this space? How or who do you kind of partner with in order to be able to work out where those gaps are if you want to become the next person to create that app? And we know that those people exist. We know that they exist when they're law students, and we know that they exist as early career professionals. So, Tay, how do you work that out if you're not that experienced practitioner?
I think you need to look at what's happening in the world today, and you need to look at where the major changes are. And we're currently going through a period of incredible business turbulence. And that's going to lead to very significant legal challenges for the business community. And sorry, I'm going to look at it through a business lens because we're a corporate firm. Others on the call are much better qualified to comment on the other areas. But with these dramatic changes, it also opens up significant opportunities. And so you need to put yourself in the situation of a business owner facing something that they couldn't reasonably have predicted happening. And you need to think to yourselves, what are the legal problems they need to solve? Because the reality is the law firms are going to be also working on trying to help those entities solve those problems. And if you can come up with a solution that's scalable, and tech is wonderfully scalable, it's got all sorts of drawbacks, but one of its advantages is it scales, then you can create a really compelling solution.
But it's also identifying, I think, in what you're saying there, Tay, and I'm going to bring this question over to you, Jessica, is also that you have to be, as a law student, and I think we've heard this said by all of you actually throughout, you have to be focused on more than looking just at the law. You also have to have that business acumen or business orientation and be watching the trends there and, in a way, marrying the two, or other areas that are relevant. So, Jessica, how have you come to that as an early career professional, in terms of identifying the gaps where you can jump in with a solution, whether it's tech or otherwise?
So at the firm that I was at previously, we were only a very new firm. So they opened about 3 months before I'd started there. So I think I was in quite a unique position in that I could come up with solutions or see where things weren't quite working probably how they should have, which might not have been the same if I was in, a firm that had been established for 15, 20 years. So I think that was probably one benefit for me in being able to see what isn't working and how, if in a perfect world, if I could look at this and go, this is the solution, try and sort of work backwards from that and try and work out how I could, try and implement some different things. And I think that having a principal or a senior partner or whoever you go to who is really supportive of those sorts of ideas also really helps as well. So again, being a newer firm, we were able to they weren't things that were so ingrained in our day-to-day running that we needed to go back 10 years to fix them. And I think just from another point of view is connecting with other people outside the firm who might have some, sort of experience in those sorts of things and reaching out to them and saying, look, this is what we do at our firm. What do you think could work at yours? So I'm lucky to have a really good group of other young professionals on the coast, and we all work in different areas that we can sort of all touch base and go, okay, well, this isn't working for us. What do you guys do? How could we change it and adapt it to make it better for our firm?
Jemima, you live in the space of LOD, innovate and design. So you live in the space of looking at those gaps and identifying them and, I guess, really seeing the opportunities, which for you become trying to provide solutions. But there are opportunities that exist potentially for the folks that are on this call. Where are you seeing those trend/opportunities in the work that you do in-house and obviously reflecting also for private law firms?
So the way we tend to approach this is really problem-led, to do something pretty radical and ask people, what are your challenges? If you had a magic wand and you could wave it, what would you fix? And trying to drill down into what's wrong, what's causing it, and then that's kind of where you start to build the solution to really understand the problem and the cause of it. And in terms of trends, a lot of this is probably similar for in-house and for private practice, where teams are busy. They can't do everything. You can't just keep working ridiculously hard and hope that will just solve the problem. Looking at, all right, well, what can we stop doing? And some of those repetitive tasks that we've talked about are the ones that are potentially ripe for automation and maybe even AI type solutions, the things that are not possibly the best use of a highly skilled lawyer's time, or at least can reduce the repetitive kind of manual parts of it, so that you can use a contract automation tool to create the first draft, or if you're an in-house lawyer, potentially push some work back onto the business so that within certain parameters, you can have a non-lawyer preparing drafts of contracts and automatic approval workflows and things like that, which can often be very manual tasks with pieces of paper moving around pretty regularly. But those are the kind of the main areas, and certainly in the current state of the world, there's been a lot of interest, as I think we've talked about already, in looking at electronic signatures, and it's not simple from a legal perspective, but that's suddenly become very important, and how it's been it's an interesting driver of innovation. Lots of organisations that have previously said, oh, we can't do this is too risky, suddenly have to, because we can't physically be in the same place together to get a physical piece of paper signed. So it's probably the situation we're faced with at the moment isn't one that anyone would have predicted, but having a look at, what sorts of other ways can we make things easier and remove that friction from processes in our day-to-day legal work. And I don't think in a lot of ways, if you have a basic understanding of legal processes, you don't necessarily need to be an expert to identify those problems.
One of the questions, thank you for that. And one of the questions that we've had posed is, if we look at our current situation that we're in now, and we were going to try to identify the areas of practice, I'm going to express it that way, that might be looking for folks to support or be employed in. And a couple that were mentioned there was employment law, which is one. Family law actually also is huge at the moment. What are some of the other areas where we might see the likelihood of a spike or an increase in the need for practitioners versus others where that may, for the moment, be a little slower? Angus, can I address that question to you in terms of what you're seeing? But feel free, everyone, please, to jump in as well.
Well, if I can just jump on a question that was directed squarely at me, and I can answer very quickly. In terms of hackathons where students don't have a strong grounding in legal practice or legal knowledge, the entire intention that sits in that hackathon environment is that students don't have the blinkers on yet. And the idea of the blinkers on is, once you go into legal practice, you very rapidly become confined in one way of thinking. A lot of these problems are out-of-the-box problems that, looking from a perspective of someone who's yet to be tarnished by the effect of legal practice and the intellectual conditioning that often can happen in legal practice, is really important. And that's why I try and stay squarely across policy, academia and professional practice, because that's the best way, I think, of keeping my eyes wide. You as students have the opportune maximum of the world as your oyster at the moment, because you can take yourself wherever you could possibly think you could be, and that can be as far out of the box as you possibly could think. All that the hackathon has to quarantine that is mentorship from legal practitioners who are in practice to validate ideas or to alter ideas that actually would be applicable in legal practice. In terms of how you might be connected to Innovators, if I can again plug the Legal Forecast, and if you go to www.thelegalforecast.com and you click TLF Connect, TLF Connect is the program we've launched last month that connects specifically people in your situation, the audience of this webinar, to leaders in innovation, whether that's legal technology, as Terri's expressing, legal innovation, which is what Jemima is expressing, or the more traditional mode of practice in terms of how you interact with the court. To answer the question about how practice might be impacted in the future, I'm fortunate because my practice is intellectual property law and tax litigation. I suspect tax is an area that could be on the up in the next couple of years. I never expected that I would be practicing tax, and I would never expect, if I was in your shoes and I took myself back to when I was in the College of Law and someone said to me, you'll be practicing tax in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, and you'll be loving it, I would have laughed at it. So everyone who's laughing and rolling their eyes thinking tax, my story and bear witness. Other areas of law, I strongly suspect tax and intellectual property are both fabrics of society. Tax is a truism in almost everything. Every transaction has a tax attached to it. And every transaction, almost every transaction, has an intellectual property right associated with it. So they're consistent in terms of the way that our society organises itself. I strongly suspect something that will emerge over the next couple of years that will be expedited by the COVID situation is cybersecurity. Anything insurance related to cybersecurity, anything in terms of platform integrity, digital signatures, as Jemima pointed out. There's a raft of interesting things happening in that space. Being inquisitive in terms of how this might affect us, I think is a good starting point. The other aspect to it, I suppose, is the employment side and what this feels like in practice. I have a team of 20 people that we have, as of last week, moved everyone to a remote practice. I today spent 2.5 hours in the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, and by in I mean by telephone, and yesterday I spent an hour in the Land Court by Zoom. So practice is as practice was, just in a different medium. I don't think it's something to fear in terms of job loss. I think it's something to embrace in the sense that we have a new world emerging in front of us, and anyone who's embracing that world, I think, will be taken with it in strides. I think resistance should be applied with sense, and I would say that in a degree of answer to the question about artificial intelligence. I've been involved with the Human Rights Commissioner's discussion paper, issue paper and white paper on human rights and technology, and a big aspect of that is how regulatory bodies deal with artificial intelligence and how artificial intelligence plays a role in relation to human rights and society generally. As Tay mentioned earlier, the regulatory responses to these technologies in practice and their application is a moving feast, and it's an emerging area in and of itself.
Angus, I just might jump in there because I want to, if I can, just jump to Tay and to Jemima as well. Tay and Jemima, we were speaking about the specific practice areas, but I'm wondering whether, given the nature of this topic and panel, that we might also be chatting with folks about the opportunity of hybrid roles, of taking the work that they're doing and the legal qualifications and thinking about how to use that in different ways. And Tay, if I can first address that question to you, and Jemima, I'm going to come to you with that question as well. Tay, what are your thoughts on that?
Sure, thanks, Terri. So we're seeing significant workload passing into our, perhaps no surprise, into our strategic advisory group, which is the litigation and disputes area. Things like infrastructure projects, construction projects, all face challenges delivering against deadlines. And also, perhaps not surprising, the area of restructuring and insolvency will be very, very busy for a long time to come. From a new law perspective, we're continuing to grow our team in Brisbane of legal analysts, which is the entry-level role. That is a new law career pathway, which is the point in which an individual would enter Ashurst Advance, which is our new law division. And it's a very structured pathway. We've been doing this for a long time now. And it allows people to come in and then from there spread out across the firm, either coming into the legal technology team, legal project management, operations roles, business development, and the like. And we're continuing to forecast a shortage of new law skills. And so we're really focusing on building a homegrown team here in Queensland. So it's a really exciting area. And look, there's some universities that are specifically offering courses with a new law focus, such as Bond. Those are helpful, but by no means a prerequisite. And if you just can indulge me for 1 second, I just want to share a quick anecdote. So a couple of years ago, someone came and spoke to me and asked about what they should do in order to up their technical skills. And you mentioned MOOCs, Terri. I pointed them to the Udacity Introduction to Computer Programming course, which is on Python, where you can build your own search engine over 12 or 14 hours. I actually did it myself many years ago. That individual went and carried out the course and taught themselves some basic Python. And about 6 months later, they went for an interview at Google. And the interviewer asked every candidate, tell us about, do you have any coding skills? And as it turned out, this individual was able to say, yes, well, actually, I built a search engine in Python. And they got the job at Google. So there's an opportunity to use those MOOC courses to your advantage.
Fantastic. And Jemima, I'm going to pose the same question to you. Sorry, Tay, just before, could you just repeat that course name again?
That's Introduction to Computer Science. I believe it's 101, and it's at Udacity, udacity.com.
Yep, so Udacity is one of the MOOC providers, just to kind of underscore that if it needed to be. Jemima, Jessica, I'm coming to you for the very last question because I know that we're getting close to time. But Jemima, your thoughts in relation to the other opportunities, if you like, that are available, because all of you here have started with a law degree. And some of you have gone down, I guess, what we might call a more traditional path, although come to it perhaps in very many different ways. You folks have too. So if we don't want to go into private practice, Tay's outlined some great opportunities there that combine it. I know you folks at LOD Innovate and Design similarly have those sorts of folks working with you. So can you tell us just a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So the team that I work with at LOD does consist of reformed lawyers, but also non-lawyers, and they don't like it when I refer to them as non-lawyers, but it's a point of distinction. We do have in our team tech developers and automation specialists, some of whom have also studied law, but some haven't. And I think that what is really important in building any kind of team that's looking at innovating is multidisciplinary skills, and that can be within a single human who is a lawyer and learn some of these things, like a bit like what Tay was just mentioning, project management, those other complementary skills. And I think having some other things in your toolkit in addition to your technical legal skills, such as learning about change management, project management, design thinking, all those sorts of things can help you pivot if you happen to have worked in a particular practice area that, you know, has an uptick or a downturn, so that you can have a broader skill set that's not just focused on the legal skills and really, you know, a bit more in the problem solving area. And that's certainly something that we find quite useful, and something that's helped me, because I'm able to obviously have my own legal skill set, but having those broader skills means that you can be a bit industry agnostic in terms of the clients you're helping. You don't need to be a financial services lawyer to help solve the problems of a financial services lawyer if you have good problem solving skills.
Absolutely. And Jessica, you get to have the last word of the evening. And I'm going to wrap it up a little bit like this. Our task today was, in a way, to look at the future trends in the legal industry, to particularly have a bit of a focus on how tech is playing its role in that, and given the current circumstances that we find ourselves in, to think about how perhaps we can put our best foot forward, or areas where we could walk or create a path going forward. If there's kind of one thing in all of that, that as an early career professional yourself, that you would want to take away from our discussion this evening, what would that be?
I think it's that the resilience side of things, and like Jemima said, you know, pivoting your skills so that, you know, I did family law at my last firm. That's pretty much all I did, with a little bit of conveyancing and wills and estates on the side. And the firm I'm at now doesn't do family at all. So using those skills that I was able to use in terms of electronic conveyancing and things like that, and changing them and bringing them into this firm where they haven't done it, but have been trying to transition into that space. I think being able to sort of pivot your skills and change the way that, you know, you think as well is really important. But obviously also having that resilience, because it's going to be bumpy no matter what it is. And I think no matter where you're working or what you're doing, having the people around you to help build you up and, you know, make those connections with different, you know, reach out to, you know, the legal forecast and the Centre for Legal Innovation and places like that, where you can build those relationships and sort of have that push behind you to help you going up.
And the support, I think, probably too, is where we find ourselves today. So on that note, and Jackie, knowing that we are just a few minutes over, I'm going to hand back to you. But if I may, on behalf of everyone that's been listening, extend our thanks to this amazing group of panellists. And of course, on behalf of the panellists, extend our thanks very much to everyone who has participated. And Jackie, thank you very much for bringing all of us together. That's very much appreciated as well. So if I may, over to you.
Thank you, Terri, and thank you to Angus and Jessica and Tay and Jemima. What a fascinating conversation that we've had today, and I very much encourage everyone to keep thinking about the things that we've talked about, and I'm sure that all the panelists would be very welcoming of your connections on LinkedIn if you did have any further questions. We probably haven't got to all of the questions, and I do apologize for that, but in a 1 hour discussion with so many engaged people, which we're very lucky to have you all join us, we weren't sorry, but we weren't able to get to all. I just wanted to thank all the panelists again, and certainly thank Terri Mottershead as well. When we first started having a discussion, which was December, I think it was, Terri, about running this panel. The world was a completely different place, and we've all had to do what Jessica has recommended and pivot and move things online at the last minute. So I do thank you for your patience there as well. We will be sending out an email to everyone with a link to this recording in the next couple of days. So stand by for an email from myself. I'll also pop some of the links and lists of some of the resources that Terri and the panel have mentioned. And one of the things that Terri's very generously offered to everyone who registered for this event is free membership to the Young Legalpreneurs. What's SIG again? Special Interest Group. I just learned that today. And this is a private LinkedIn group that Terri runs through the Centre for Innovation, and we'll also send you some links to things like the Legal Hackers and the Legal Forecast and all the other things that we talked about this afternoon. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us and for staying on the line. Thank you to our panellists, and I'm pretty impressed we managed to get through that with no barking dogs, meowing cats, or children, which is the new world. Mine's come in and from his walk, he's in, but he's being really quiet now. So thank you, everyone. I wish you all good night, and we'll be sending out further information in the days to come. So have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all. Bye.